When Keanu Reeves stepped onto the set of the Steve Harvey Show, the atmosphere crackled with a bright, lively energy. The audience leaned forward in their seats, buzzing with anticipation for what they expected to be a fun hour filled with laughter, charm, and perhaps a few juicy behind-the-scenes tales from the glittering world of Hollywood. Steve Harvey strode out onto the stage, his signature half-grin lighting up his face, cue cards clutched in one hand, eyes twinkling with that familiar warmth that made him a household name. He was ready to guide the conversation with his effortless blend of humor and heartfelt curiosity. But as Keanu took his seat across from Steve, and his gaze briefly settled on the small silver crucifix hanging from Steve's neck, something unspoken passed between them. The tone shifted, subtly at first, then profoundly. What had begun as a routine celebrity interview was about to transform into something far deeper, far more real. In just a few minutes, Steve wouldn't be the one steering the discussion with clever questions. He'd be the one struggling to hold back tears, caught off guard by what Keanu was about to say. It all started with a single, unexpected sentence from Keanu, delivered in his quiet, unassuming way. "Can I tell you something I've never revealed in public before?" The studio lights dimmed ever so slightly as the audience settled into their seats, the faint hum of excitement giving way to a hushed, attentive stillness. The familiar, upbeat rhythm of Steve's theme song faded into the background as he crossed the stage, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. He paused at the edge, waved to the crowd, and flashed that iconic grin. Tonight, though, something felt different. He could sense it in the air, a weight, a purpose that went beyond entertainment. This wasn't just another show. It was a moment waiting to unfold, something sacred hovering just out of sight. With a voice full of genuine admiration, Steve introduced his guest. He didn't just call him a Hollywood star, though that was true. He framed him as something rarer, more human. "The media calls him the kindest man in Hollywood," Steve announced to a swell of applause that rippled through the room. "The internet says he's the last good guy left in a world gone cold. But me, I say he's the realest example of grace I've ever laid eyes on." The crowd erupted, cheering wildly as Keanu Reeves stepped into the spotlight. He was dressed in his usual understated style, dark jeans, a plain black shirt, and a simple blazer. Nothing flashy, no pretense, just him. He raised a hand in a brief wave, offered a soft, almost bashful smile, and gave a slight nod, clearly uncomfortable with the tidal wave of attention washing over him. As he settled into the chair beside Steve, the energy in the room shifted again. It moved away from the glitz of a TV show and towards something quieter, more truthful. There was no rush, no performative flair, just a raw human presence that seemed to anchor everyone watching. Keanu spoke first, his voice low and gentle, almost as if he didn't want to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over the space. "Thanks," he said, then let out a small half-laugh, half-shy admission. "This kind of thing always catches me off guard. I'm just a guy trying to do my best, you know." Steve leaned forward, his grin widening. "That's exactly what makes you special, my man." They didn't linger on the surface-level chatter about film roles or red carpet gossip. Instead, they dove straight into something deeper, talking about humanity, about kindness, about what it meant to walk through the world without armor, even when life gave you every reason to build walls around your heart. Steve brought up Keanu's reputation, the viral videos of him giving up his seat on a crowded subway, helping crew members load equipment on set, sharing chunks of his blockbuster salaries with stuntmen, camera operators, even makeup artists. Was it all true? Steve asked. Keanu nodded. "All true," he confirmed, his tone gentle, not boastful. "But I don't see it as anything big. To me, it's just the right thing to do." He paused, his eyes softening as he looked out at the audience. Everybody's going through something, you know. Sometimes the smallest gesture can turn someone's whole day around. Steve nodded, deeply moved by the simplicity of it. There was something humbling about hearing those words from a man who could have easily detached himself from the world, hidden behind fame and fortune. Yet here he was, open, honest, unguarded. The conversation turned to a contrast that fascinated Steve. How could someone who'd tasted so much success, who had every reason to coast, remain so grounded? Keanu took a moment, his expression thoughtful. I guess I've always felt like none of this is promised, he said. I've lost a lot, and when you lose people you love, when life shakes you down to your core, you realize none of it, none of the money, the movies, the noise, makes you better than anyone else. He paused again, his eyes drifting somewhere off camera, maybe into a memory. I grew up moving around a lot, he continued. Born in Lebanon, raised in Canada. My father walked out when I was little. My sister battled Steve battled leukemia. I lost my partner. I lost a child. And still, I'm here. Every day is a choice. You either let the pain harden you into something cold, or you let it shape you into someone softer, someone who sees. The words landed heavy in the room. You could feel it in the stillness, the way people held their breath, reflecting on their own losses, their own quiet battles. Steve, visibly moved, reached up and touched the small crucifix hanging around his neck. He didn't say anything at first, just let his fingers rest there, a silent acknowledgement of something personal, something only he could feel. You talk about silence like it's familiar, he finally said, his voice softer now. Keanu nodded. It is. Silence has been my companion for a long time. But in that silence, sometimes I hear the clearest things. Steve leaned back slightly, his tone gentler still. You ever hear God in that silence? For the first time in the interview, Keanu paused, really paused. Then he looked Steve straight in the eyes. Yes, he said. I believe in something greater. I've questioned it. I've walked away from it. I've felt alone. But even in the deepest darkness, I could feel something, a presence, a peace. Not always loud, not always comforting, but always there. Steve closed his hand around the crucifix. That's faith, he said quietly, even if it doesn't have a name, even if it's just something you feel. Keanu looked at the cross now, his expression shifting. He leaned forward just a touch, almost hesitating, like he was standing at the edge of something. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud before? He asked, his voice lower now, full of something different, something weighty. Steve didn't speak. He just nodded, giving him the space. Keanu took a long, intentional breath. There was a night, he began. A few years ago, I was in a really dark place. I couldn't move, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be alive. Everything felt empty. The audience went dead silent. No rustling, no whispers, just pure focus. I was scrolling through my phone, he continued, just trying to distract myself, trying to feel anything at all. And I came across a video. It was you, talking about purpose, about faith, about how God doesn't waste pain. Steve froze, his hand still on the cross. But it wasn't just what you said, Keanu added. It was how you said it. Like you'd lived it. And you were wearing this crucifix. This exact one. I remember thinking, this man believes in something bigger. Maybe I can too. Steve looked down at the cross, his fingers tightening around it. I watched that clip 3 times, Keanu whispered. And the next morning, for the first time in weeks, I got out of bed. He sat back slowly, almost as if the memory carried physical weight. I've never told anyone that, he said, but I've carried your words with me ever since. Steve didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice cracked. I just talk from the heart, man. I had no idea. Keanu interrupted gently. That's just it. You didn't have to know. That's what made it real. You weren't trying to inspire me. You were just being yourself. And that saved me. Emotion swelled in Steve's eyes now, the studio lights catching a tear that slipped down his cheek. And that crucifix you wear, Keanu said, his voice full of reverence, it's not just a symbol. It's a sign, a message. You think you're just a comedian with faith, but Steve, I think you're something else. Steve looked at him, confused but open. I think you're a minister in disguise, Keanu said. And I have something else to tell you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine. The studio fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Steve, still gripping the cross around his neck, whispered one word, "I'm listening." There was a pause on stage, not the kind you'd expect from TV, not a beat for laughs or drama, but a deep, real silence, the kind that arrives when truth steps into the room. Keanu had just asked, "Can I tell you something I've never revealed in public?" And Steve, steady but surprised, had given him the floor. Now Keanu adjusted in his chair, like he was about to open a long-closed door. The audience was still. No one moved. They just watched. Keanu took a slow breath, his eyes locked on Steve, though what he saw seemed far away. "There was a season in my life," he began, "when I couldn't find a reason to wake up." Steve didn't flinch, but his body stilled, as if his soul was leaning in. "I had lost people," Keanu went on. "Not just to death, but to life, to time, to pain. One after the other." His voice stayed calm, but each word carried an echo of something buried. "My daughter was stillborn," he said softly. "And just a few weeks later, I lost Jennifer. She was the closest thing I had to home." He paused, then glanced at his hands. "I don't think I cried right away. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, so quiet you forget you're alive." The audience sat breathless, some leaning forward, some sinking into themselves. "I kept working," he said. "Kept doing interviews, kept playing roles. Because it's easier to disappear behind a character than to be yourself when yourself is broken." Steve's fingers found the crucifix again. Not for show, just instinct, just something to hold on to. But eventually, Keanu continued. The noise outside couldn't drown out the silence inside. And one night, that silence almost won. Steve tilted his head, his eyes searching Keanu's face. "It was late," Keanu said. "I was alone. Hadn't slept in days. Didn't want to eat. Didn't want to talk. Didn't want to be. So I sat there in the dark, just sitting, 4 hours." A long pause followed. No prayers, no thoughts, just that emptiness after all thoughts had gone. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. "And that's when it happened," he said. "I picked up my phone, scrolling, not looking for anything, just trying not to feel." He breathed in slow, and I saw a clip. "It was you." Steve blinked, caught off guard. "You were on stage," Keanu said, "talking about storms, about how God doesn't waste pain, about how sometimes the thing breaking you is breaking you open." Steve nodded slowly. He remembered that night. "I don't know why I stopped scrolling," Keanu admitted. "But I watched it all. Then I watched it again." His voice cracked, just a touch. "You said, if you're still breathing, it means God's not finished with you yet." And for some reason, that hit different. It felt like someone finally saw me. Not the actor, not the headlines, just the man in the dark. Steve exhaled softly, his hand now fully over the cross. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice a whisper. "I need you to know, Steve, that night, I stood up, not because I was healed, not because I had answers, but because, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. And that was enough to make me move." The word struck Steve hard. He didn't hide it, his eyes wet, his lips trembling. Keanu looked at him with gratitude and reverence. "I never meant to tell this story," he said. "But sitting here, looking at you, I realized I had to." Steve's voice came slow, thick with feeling. "Man, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "You already did, years ago." He gestured toward Steve's chest. "And that crucifix you wear, that's what caught my eye first, before your words, before your message. That symbol, in that moment, was a lighthouse." Steve gazed at the cross, his hand tightening. "I kept watching you over the next few days," Keanu said. "Not because it fixed me, but because it reminded me healing doesn't need answers, just hope." The audience stayed quiet, some now teary, a few wiping their eyes. Steve leaned back, swallowing hard. "You think you're just talking," Keanu said, "just entertaining, just surviving. But that night, you were more than that. You were lifting someone who didn't have the strength to stand." Steve closed his eyes, taking it in. "I needed to tell you," Keanu went on. Because the world knows you as a host, a comedian, a motivator. But I don't think that's the full truth. Steve looked back at him, stunned. I think, Keanu said slowly, you're a minister in disguise. A long silence followed. Steve shook his head, not denying, just humbled. You ever wonder why people are drawn to you? Keanu asked. All the time, Steve admitted. Keanu smiled gently. It's because they are not just hearing your voice. They are feeling your spirit. You carry something sacred, man. Steve let out a short, broken laugh. I'm just trying to make it, like everyone else. That's what makes it real, Keanu said. You're not trying to be anything but you. And that reaches people you'll never meet. He glanced at the audience. People in rooms like this. People on screens. People sitting in silence, like I was. Then he turned back to Steve. And I know it's hard sometimes, carrying that weight, not knowing if it matters. Steve nodded, visibly shaken. But I'm here to tell you, Keanu said, it does. And just when the moment seemed to peak, Keanu leaned in, his voice low. Steve, the way you carry that crucifix, it's not just a symbol. It's a sign. And tonight, I have something to tell you. Something that might change your life the way you changed mine. Steve looked up, startled. What do you mean? He asked softly. Keanu nodded. I've held these words for years. They came from you. And tonight, I need to say them back. Because you may have forgotten their power. Steve sat frozen as Keanu began. You said, God doesn't always call the qualified. He qualifies the called. Pain has a language. And when someone who's been through it speaks, it cuts through. Steve nodded, the words coming back to him. You said, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things, Keanu added. Even if you think you're just joking, just surviving, God might be using that to change a life. Steve leaned forward, elbows on knees, that old clip flooding back. I realized something that day, Keanu said. It wasn't just your words. It was how you believed them. That lit something in me. He softened. I had lost my way. Grief buried my compass. But your words, and that cross, reminded me I wasn't invisible. You were a stranger, but you became a beacon. Steve let out a long breath. Keanu smiled. That's the thing about beacons. They don't know who's watching. They just shine. Steve spoke, his voice low. Sometimes I wonder if I've done enough. Keanu leaned in. It does. I'm living proof. Steve shook his head. I was just trying to survive, man. Not save anyone. And that, Keanu said, is why you did. The audience stirred, small sounds of emotion breaking through. Steve looked at them, then back at Keanu. You said something changed in you, he said. What was it? Keanu paused, then said, hope. That maybe silence wasn't the end. That maybe God still had something for me. He looked at Steve. Seeing that cross while you spoke purpose, it was no coincidence. It was light through a screen. Steve nodded, moved. You reminded me, Keanu said. I wasn't forgotten. My story wasn't over. I remember your words, word for word. I've carried them for years. And tonight, I need to say them back. Because maybe you've forgotten their power. Steve braced himself. Keanu took a breath. Sometimes you're not the one being rescued. You're the one rescuing. And you don't even know it. Steve's lips trembled. You think you're talking, but you're testifying. Keanu leaned back. Steve covered his face, then looked up, eyes wet. You remembered all that? He asked. I needed to, Keanu said. I wasn't just hearing you. I was lifted by you. Steve sat back, hands clasped, trying to hold steady. The room felt like more than a stage now. Like healing was happening under the lights. Keanu spoke, softer. And maybe you don't hear this enough. But Steve, you matter. Not for what you do, but who you are. You carried faith where I had none. Steve couldn't reply right away, his chest rising and falling slow. Then Keanu whispered, I have something to tell you that might change your life, like you changed mine. Steve looked up, the studio holding its breath. Keanu leaned forward, calm. There was a night I didn't want to live. And you, a stranger, pulled me out, not with a script, but with truth. God uses the broken, the unlikely. That's you, Steve. Steve shook. Why me? Keanu stood. Because God picks the scarred, the ones who've bled quiet, to reach others. Steve rose, trembling. I've thought of quitting, he said. Keanu nodded. Me too. But you're enough, real, not perfect. Steve searched him. You believe faith holds in this world. Keanu paused, then said, faith doesn't pretend. Hollywood scripts pain. Faith is true, quiet, deep. It saves forever. Steve nodded, choked. It met me in silence, Keanu said, through you. They stood, hugged, brothers, not actor and host. The crowd rose, silent, sacred. Steve turned to them, voice cracked. This is my greatest gift. He shut his eyes, whispered, let's pray. Two men, broken by pain, healed the air. Faith lived again.